Hello everybody. As I've mentioned previously on this channel, I didn't have the most normal childhood. So I am going through a bunch of media that I didn't get to consume at that time for the first time, and I'm bringing you guys along for the ride, and I hope you'll find that interesting. Today we'll be continuing my Watching for the First Time series on The X-Files, Season 2. And if you didn't watch the first video, the link will be somewhere around here. I don't know, gotta figure out cards, never done those before. But for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm going through the show an entire season at a time, rather than every episode or every 3 episodes, just so it doesn't completely dominate the channel. So, here are my thoughts on Season 2. So where we left off Season 1, the X-Files had been shut down. Totally cut off. It's over. The show's done. I was kind of wondering how they'd get around that, and really, I'm not totally satisfied with the way in which they did. They basically just were like, oh, it's shut down, and you guys have been reassigned, and, you know, they address the fact that Mulder's character is basically shut down just like the X-Files. Without the X-Files, Mulder's just not Mulder. And I feel like that's an accurate way to deal with it. And of course, Dana's off teaching students how to dissect people and, you know, following her medical side of things, and that kind of makes sense. She kind of falls in line with her routine and goes back to her old life. But this has been Mulder's entire life as these X-Files. This is his whole quest. And without them, he's kind of not himself. I kind of like that, actually. And Mulder gets the sense consistently throughout the season that the FBI director, Skinner, is just handing him bogus assignments, just the dirtiest, worst jobs they can. But sometimes they turn out to be totally legit actual X-Files, but they're not being investigated as X-Files because the department's shut down. So ultimately, the X-Files do, of course, get reopened because we do have a show to run. And the catalyst for this is Skinner, who I think is really the main character of this particular season, because he's the one that experiences the most change. He starts off being the adversary, the one who shuts down the X-Files because, you know, things aren't going according to the book, and things are bad, and, you know, you're attracting too much government attention and all this. And by the, midway through the season, or at least the first quarter of the season, he's the one that ultimately reopens the X-Files because he's going, no, there's definitely something here that the government doesn't want us to know, and we have a responsibility as the FBI to actually investigate it. Episode 4 was also one that I found particularly interesting, the whole idea of how much could you get done if you didn't have to sleep. And this has been addressed in later media, such as the Twilight series, where Edward Cullen is supposedly able to know all these languages and play the piano beautifully because he spent all the time that we would spend sleeping doing all of those things, and then had a long life on top of it. And it sort of gets into this notion of what would you do with that time, and I gotta say, these people did kind of a disappointing thing with that time in killing each other eventually. Not to mention all the violence they committed during the Vietnam War. We see an accurate depiction of the Long Island Expressway, just traffic. As a Long Islander myself, I found that rather amusing. When Mulder starts mentioning that he hasn't been sleeping in a while, I kind of started to wonder if he had undergone the surgery to not have to sleep after that, and I was like, oh man, that's going to be a hell of a twist at the end of the season. But then, of course, we walk in on Scully seeing him sleeping, so I guess that's kind of debunked, and that's kind of a disappointment, but also probably a realistic thing. I don't think Mulder would undergo something that clearly drives people to some level of insanity, and that being said, how committed is he to the truth? Is he willing to undergo something that would make him able to pursue the truth 24 hours a day instead of only 16? Maybe. And that's just kind of a testament to how committed that character is. But I gotta say, that would have been a cool plot twist. So there's this character, Dwayne Barry, who is in an institution because they think he's nuts, because he keeps talking about alien abductions. Long story short, he gets Scully abducted by aliens. And we see some sort of belly movement on her while she's in the care of these, unseen aliens. So we can assume there's some sort of pregnancy situation going on there. And I'm going, while I'm watching this, I'm like, yes, come on, she's gonna believe, she's gonna come back pregnant and be like, how did this happen? And there's gonna be evidence, and she's not gonna be able to deny it, and it's gonna be perfect. We're gonna actually see a different side of this character. And then eventually when she does come back, of course, they've wiped her memory. And I knew, I should have known that would happen, because their whole dynamic is that Mulder believes and Scully doesn't, except when they flip that for dramatic reasons. I should have known, but man was I disappointed when she comes back and goes, I don't remember anything. Ugh. So we get to episode 8, and Dana is in a coma. And to me, after what happened with Star Trek The Next Generation, I have found that coma episodes are always boring. Because they have to represent some sort of conflict in the episode, but one of the main characters is unconscious the whole time. So how do you express that? Well, in the case of the X-Files, they chose the metaphor of a boat for some reason. That's not at all clear to me. And they talk about, oh, Dana's really sick and she might die, and, a healthy person would probably die, but, as of course one would expect with the show, since we know it goes on, she wakes up and is fine. And it's never brought up again. And I find that incredibly difficult to believe because, again, they did nothing to save her, and she's fine. And this is something that I think is going to be a problem on this show, is that they're just going to not explain why things work out okay. And that concerns me because I kind of am there for the why and the how and the plot. I kind of want to know how she got out of that weird boat dream where the rope was let go, and it was a weird sequence. But we did get to meet her sister, who has totally existed the whole time. And I think she's kind of interesting as a juxtaposing character to Dana, because she is very into all the mystical, magical, the unknown, the spiritual, and Dana is so not. And I wonder if that shaped her character in a historical way. I wonder if she looked at her sister and was like, well, I want nothing to do with that. I don't believe in any of that crap. I wonder if that's her motivation for being the way that she is, and why she's so hesitant to be like Mulder or her sister to believe in any of it. So then we come to episode 10, and it's another of those episodes that starts off with a slide projector, and I can't get over the idea of Mulder prepping an entire presentation for Scully. And this is pre-PowerPoint. Like, he had to spend money and time putting slides together specifically to give this presentation, which could easily have been done with a conversation and printed photos. I don't know why the show did this. I think it's just for the dramatic effect. I think the director must really love slide projectors, but it feels incredibly weird to me that Mulder would take any time out to do a presentation on something, and it's not even like a big case. He's not been stringing this case together for years, and now it's all coming together. It's like some vampire attack, and it's... Anytime that happens for me in this series, it's sort of a red flag to me. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. It's gonna be one of those episodes. So then we come up on episode 12, and we're dealing with this notion that a propensity for murder is a genetic trait. And they start talking about the Human Genome Project, which was fairly new at that time, as I understand it. And it seems that we hadn't quite worked out all the things that are and are not hereditary, because they get to the point where this person's, consciousness is present in their grandchild. And, I mean, I'd buy ghosts easier than I'd buy genetics. It's one of those situations where it's like, if you give me an explanation for something that explicitly does not make sense, it's worse than if you didn't give me any explanation at all. And then we come to episode 14. And the thing that really jumped out as a major problem for me in this episode is that one of the things they cite in the episode canonically as being evidence of the paranormal is that the drains are draining the opposite direction from whatever they think it should in whatever hemisphere they're in because of the Coriolis effect. And the Coriolis effect does exist, but it is far, far too insignificant to affect draining directions in a sink. It's on the scale of oceans, not sinks, and this has been debunked 100 times. And I'm kind of surprised that it even made it into the episode, because I'm like, I've seen drains go the other way in my life. I don't understand. Have these people never used drains? Did no one on set go, hey guys, I've used a drain and it goes this way? Because obviously that's evidence of the paranormal then. I guess it's all real. Again, it's an episode with witches. I get it. It doesn't have to be scientifically accurate, but if you're going to offer a scientific explanation for something, it should at least be backed up by science and not actually contradict itself. So then we come to episode 16, and I know it sounds like I'm skipping and doing only the even-numbered episodes of the season. I swear, I watched all of them. these are just the ones that I have notes on. Everything else is kind of either not noteworthy or didn't jump out at me. So again, we're dealing with clones, and clones are always kind of a cop-out to me. You know, it's just a way to recast the same actor 100 times, and their performance was pretty good. Like, they were somewhat distinct from each other, and there's a canonical explanation, oh, they're aliens or something, and Mulder's sister shows up. Personally, I believed for exactly 0 seconds that it was his actual sister. There was no way. And then, of course, as soon as we saw a shapeshifter on screen, I'm like, well, there you go. It's not her. There's no way it's her. But the thing that really jumped out in this episode as a major plot hole to me is the way in which they're unable to communicate with each other. And I feel like the 90s is kind of infamous for this, where there's a problem of communication, and it can be solved with a cell phone, but the writers hadn't quite gotten used to the existence of cell phones yet, so in this series, they're very aware of the fact that their characters have cell phones, so they have to create an excuse for the cell phones to not work. Bad signal, dead battery, any of those things could be it. But I'm sorry, it's just too many contrivances in this particular sequence that bother me. So, Mulder calls the hotel that Scully's going to be staying at and leaves a message for her. The caretaker at the motel or hotel, or I don't know actually what the difference between them is, starts writing it down, but his pencil breaks. And by the time Dana then comes through the door, he's forgotten who the message is for. And I'm like, oh no, there's no way that that would happen. So Mulder tries to call her cell phone, but of course, by the time he thinks to call her after trying the motel guy, she's in the shower. And I'm sorry, it's not an excuse for her to have missed a call. Basically, any time that chance decides the fate of a character, it's cheap writing. Episode 19. See, I did watch the episodes that were odd-numbered. This one I kind of love because it made connections to the Philadelphia experiment, which of course is somehow related to the Montauk Project, which is a Long Island legend, and maybe I'll do a video on that in the future, but it's on Wikipedia, look it up, it's pretty cool. They go to a naval ship that's trapped in the sea, and it's kind of awesome, this great setup, it's beautiful, and oh my god, it is such a disappointment, because ultimately, the closest thing we get to an answer is heavy salt. And, you know, don't drink the contaminated water, only drink the reclaimed water, otherwise you'll turn to salt, and also makes them age for reasons no one is able to ever explain. And I'm like, ugh, it was such a great setup. It was so good. And even Mulder and Scully don't know what's going on. It's brought up in the episode they don't know what's going on. It's kind of cool seeing them totally confused about what it could be. Is it a time warp? Is it some sort of, you know, alien intervention? Is it a disease? I don't know. And ultimately the answer we get is heavy salt. It's just kind of disappointing. And again, I know I'm being somewhat contradictory. I'm saying I want a scientific explanation, or, you know, leave it a mystery, and that sounds contradictory, but I don't really want a mystery. I want an explanation of something paranormal. And yes, okay, heavy salt is outside the realm of normal, but there's no canonical explanation for why it's happening. It's just, oh, I guess it happens in this specific region of the ocean. Maybe there's some sort of meteorite down there. Disappointment. A good example of what I'm talking about is the next episode, in which we deal with carnival attractions, specifically people with on the extreme ends of humanity's spectrum. Now, we get an explanation in this episode. This person has had some sort of fetu in fetu condition. Look it up, it's a fascinating thing. And apparently they call it a Siamese twin, but the conjoined twin is able to separate from its host and for some reason wants to kill people. That's not really explained, but at least we get some sort of explanation. It's not the greatest explanation, it's certainly not what I would call the best episode of the season, but we get an answer, you know? And interestingly enough, Mulder and Scully never really get the answer. Only the audience is aware of what actually happens to the poor thing. But like, that's better to me. I'd rather have our main characters not get an answer, but we get an answer, and have an answer rather than, I don't know, something about the salt. Alright, so now we're on episode 21, and we're talking about ghosts, essentially. But they were identical twins, and there was some Romanian ritual that was supposed to separate them so that the dead one wouldn't try to encroach on the living one's life, and They're doing an exorcism, not quite an exorcism, but the Romanian equivalent of, like, separating their souls because they were joined, because they were twins, and it doesn't, it's kind of a weak premise. I can't tell which one's the ghost and which one's the kid, and it was a confusing episode and a lot of plot contrivances. Not my favorite. Not the worst. So then we come to the final episode of the season. So what happens here is that basically there's a conspiracy to defame Mulder because he's getting too close to the truth. And through some sort of weird reverse osmosis process in the water in his house, they're basically giving him drugs that are making him psychotic. And okay, poison the water, but it also affects someone else in the house, which doesn't fit with the whole setup that they demonstrate where it's just his apartment, which, by the way, is far, far more suspicious than if they just poisoned the whole water supply for the whole building or the whole town. If they really want to take him out and have plausible deniability, it doesn't really make sense to leave evidence of, we were messing with this guy. Although I suppose there's no evidence linking it back to the government directly. So there's some sort of train buried on a Native American reservation, specifically Navajo, and it's relevant because of World War II code talkers, which is another interesting story that I'll link in the description. So one of the lay people that Mulder's in contact with accidents himself into hacking into the DoD server. Long story short, he gets access to this document, and of course, it's encoded or encrypted. They say encrypted, but it's not encrypted, it's just translated into Navajo code speak, and of course, there's not many people in the world who can do that, which kind of creates a problem for me because the government knows exactly which people can do this and does nothing to stop Mulder from getting to those people. So at this point, the government probably can't read it themselves. They need a translator to look it up. And this is an international problem. So there's someone they've probably got on tap permanently just keeping around to be able to translate this. But there's also all these other people that are able to, and they do nothing to suppress this knowledge. It's kind of strange. I don't know why Mulder and Scully are able to access this person if it's so critical to this function. Wouldn't that be the first people that the government would be like, hey, we can't find Mulder. Maybe make sure he's not going to talk to these people because we know he's got the document. So of course this document supposedly proves the existence of aliens and mentions something about vaccines and whatever. And for me the most challenging part of this particular episode is the part where the military comes in and they're like, nope, he must have disappeared, we can't see him, I looked for 3 seconds and didn't see him immediately, so he's not here, torch it anyway, to be continued. Okay, so Mulder's probably hiding under the bodies or something. He knew they were coming because the kid closed the door to the car on him, and I'm like, okay, where is this going? So he's trapped in there now, but they lit it on fire and flew away, so they're not going to look for his body, even though they mentioned specifically in that moment, nothing ever disappears forever without a trace, and so by extension, shouldn't you be looking for Mulder? You just destroyed all the traces, you want to know where he is, you want to keep him from getting the truth out, but light him on fire, that's good enough. It just doesn't make sense that the same person would do that. So now we come to the part where I try to pick out my least and most favorite episodes of the season. And I gotta tell you, this is a real struggle for me, because none of them really stand out to me. None of them were really fantastic episodes that I was like, yes, I am on board with this. I think I'm gonna have to just choose an episode as a favorite and a least favorite. So I'm gonna go with the Heavy Salt episode being my least favorite, just because of the deep disappointment I felt from an otherwise fantastic premise, and the rest of the episode really just not living up to it. And despite all of its problems, I guess I'd have to call episode 25 my favorite of the season, because we actually see some progress on the alien front. We see Mulder actually find some stuff. We see some alien bodies. That's always a plus. So I guess if I had to compare season 1 and season 2, I'm gonna like season 1 a little more, just because there were more outstanding episodes in it. I'm kind of hoping that the show will find its pace in season 3. I really love that they're letting Mulder have more comedy moments, because I think he's a funny person, and he's finally getting to showcase that. Like in the episode with the chickens, he shows up with a bucket of chicken and he's just munching on it, and like, that's hilarious, and it's just a side thing. And, you know, some of his one-liners are hilarious, and I'm hoping that we get to see more of that, but not to the point where it becomes campy. Like, it's a little campy now, but I think I'd like to just maintain the level we're at, because it's funny. So I'm obviously going to keep watching, and I hope you guys are finding these videos interesting. I certainly am. I love getting to make up for the things that I feel are gaps in my experiences, and I hope that you do as well. So that's it for this week. I will be back again next week with another video that I hope you find interesting. Until then, stay curious, because the truth is out there. Or is it out there?